those days, after that affliction, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his chosen from the four winds, from the uttermost part of earth to the uttermost part of heaven. Now,
good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. The clip was a little longer than I expected. You remember yesterday Jesus had left off talking about where the carcase is, like the sort of the transparency of his return. It's going to be an event that is not going to be missed by anybody, by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, he uses this analogy of a buzzards feeding on a carcass, and it has multiple meanings. On one hand, it means, I don't know if you're a city dweller, if you ever encounter this, because I never did till I lived in the country, which is only, now it's 17 years. So you'll see vultures circling, you'll see, and when it's out in the middle of nowhere, because sometimes they circle in town, and it's because there's some sort of heat riser above like a parking lot. The reflected heat from the sun will give it a nice updraft of warm air, and they'll use that to kind of go up and up and up and up. And then they'll kind of coast out of there and look for stuff, and they have incredible eyesight. Right. And so it's a kind of a natural phenomenon. If there's a dead body, oftentimes you can find it by watching for, especially if it's fresh and not concealed, etc. You can find it by following the carrion birds, looking for them in the sky. And if there's enough of them, and I'm sure in the ancient times this is more obvious because, less sanitation. If there's a battle, sometimes they don't bother to clean it up. They just leave all the people, let people who care come clean it up if there's anyone to do it. And in fact, you see this in the Old Testament all the time. You'll see one of the taunts that like Goliath, but a common taunt in battle would be to say something like, come to me and I will give your flesh to the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. And that goes right down to Revelation, where it's stated in the same spirit that that God calls there's an angel that comes and calls all the fowls of heaven. And I recited that scripture yesterday. Calls them to the supper of the great God. But not here, but in another place. This basic concept of where the eagles are gathered together. And eagles, don't think bald eagle. It means vultures. King James, in the King James English, vulture, eagle, no difference. They were referring to, animals going after a carcass, carrion birds, and I don't know to what degree an eagle is a carrion bird, or will eat carrion if driven in necessity. Different kinds of eagles. There's not just one kind of eagle. All right, whatever. This concept comes up several times. The most notable of which is the passage in Luke, and right off the top of my head, it's eluding me. I keep thinking, is it 17? I'm just going to draw up Luke 17, hopefully without actually having to search it. I think it's the last verse. Yeah, it is. Okay, good. So let's just look at it. I'm going to bring this up because it's an important thing to know. There's this concept, if you look here, this is not an exact a mirror of the Matthew passage. Matthew has several passages in other Gospels that sort of answer to Matthew 24. There's Mark 13, Matthew 24, and Luke 21. And Luke 21 is the most different and may actually refer to some completely different thing as far as a different speech. If you're trying to keep score like that, you know, I mean, if you're fundamentalist in your outlook, they all have to be 3 separate times he said these things. If you're not, then it's just recording things he said and combining them into, you know, a particular set of them, which you will attribute to a certain speech. But it's all, you know, it's all based on memory and the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So that's what makes it inspired. It's not the fact that it was like this is not like a newspaper report, or like a newspaper report ought to be, and so it shouldn't be judged on those standards. But anyways, and he talks about several things. Like in verse 27, he talks about the days of Noah. 26 actually. Noah went into the ark, and the people were eating and drinking, and they bought and sold, they planted, they builded. But then when Lot entered into, they knew not what was going on until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise also in the days of Lot, that's Sodom and Gomorrah. They thought everything was fine. They ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. And when Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. And so then he says, even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. There's like this, there's this, I don't know what you would call it, you know, there's this direction, right? Lot goes out of Sodom, but then Noah enters into the ark. There's also a chapter in Isaiah chapter 26, where he says, come, my people, enter into thy chambers, and shut the doors about thee. Hide thyself for a little moment, till the indignation be overpassed, I believe. That's close to the wording. And it, you know, and it has this idea that God will shelter his elect in the time of great indignation, of his indignation. He will shield them from it. We have this idea that they're separated from the wicked before the wicked are destroyed. And so you have Noah going into the ark, Lot going out of Sodom. You have in and out. And then you have this in verse 31. In that day, he which shall be upon the housetop, and his stuff in the house, let him not come down to take it away. And he that is in the field, let him not likewise return back. That's not the verse I wanted, but remember Lot's wife. We already had that, verse 31 in Matthew 24. But then look at 33. Whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it. Whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. That's an important thought in terms of what's your intention? What are you looking at? Is saving your life the most important thing? Or is your service to God the most important thing? Because that's how you end up losing your life. But it can also refer to life in the sense of they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. Lot lost his life. You know, he had a life in Sodom, and he gave it up and saved it, saved his life. And same thing with Noah. Noah had a life. He had a world he was part of, but then he gave it up, builded the ark, and sailed away into history. Or into legend. So, verse 34, this is why I came here. I tell you that In that night there shall be 2 men in one bed. The one shall be taken, and the other left. 2 women shall be grinding together. The one shall be taken, the other left. It annoys me that at some point someone told me that they thought that grinding meal. All right, let's just put it that way. 2 men shall be in the field. The one shall be taken, the other left. And I did 2 men in one bed. It's not, you understand, like, they don't have the perverse mind of the modern people. I never even thought those things, despite being modern and being whatever, as attuned, I suppose, to the corruption of our generation as any. I never thought anything about 2 men in one bed, because sometimes you share a bed. It's, you know, like, you know, you ever seen those movies where the guys get all uncomfortable? You know, like I see John Candy and you know, the white-haired guy, Steve Martin, in a bed in some comedy, and they're you know, it's just 2 men, they got to share a bed, you know. It's no big deal. 2 men in the field, one should be taken, the other should be left. I hate that I even have to say that. Only because people, at some point, somebody told me, like, you know, that 2 meanings. I guess so. But anyways, 2 shall be in the field, and one should be taken, the other should left. Now, this idea, one taken, the other left, you know, that's, a lot of times that is said, well, that's the rapture. That's the rapture. One's taken away, just like Noah and Lot. You gotta keep everything in context, all right? Luke 17:37 says this, and they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. And it means what I said. They ask him, where are they taken? Because it's obvious. You don't have to ask, where is the one left? He's left in the field, left in the bed, left at their grinding. Right? Where is the one taken? Where do they go? Wherever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. You don't use an analogy like that if you're talking about your elect. If you're talking about saving people, you don't say, like, so when you save them, we're going to take them. Well, wherever the vultures are, that's where they'll be. It's not a friendly analogy. It's quite frightening if you understand it. It's very, what's the word I want? Well, it's dark. Let's just put it that way. I was trying to think of macabre, you know? Or macabre, if you go by the, whatever, by bad pronunciation. So I just want to mention that because, you know, that passage is often misunderstood. It's not talking about any rapture or even the resurrection. It's talking about apostasy and people being drawn into standing with Satan to resist whatever is coming, being caught up in the region about Judea just before Jesus returns. And those are when he a call goes out, he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. What did it say? And before that says, I'm trying to remember the wording just before that. I'm just going to pull it up for myself. It's ridiculous. I just don't want to have to run. Have to run through Revelation 16 in my mind until I get to that verse. Sometimes that's how it goes. I have to start at a familiar place, and then I have to go forward. Yeah. Yeah, the three frogs, the three unclean spirits that come out of the mouth of the false prophet and the beast, and out of the dragon. It comes out of the mouth of all three. So there's the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. It's like an unholy trinity, right? For they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth to the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them together, in my song I go, gather them together. I just like the sound of that. Gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon, the valley of Megiddo, a great broad valley. And that's where the blood is going to flow. That's what they're taking. You know? One's going to be taken, the other will be left. Where are they taken? Oh, to the battle. Not to the to that which is good. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Now, yeah, you get people who want to take this all literally and say, like, stars fall? They can't fall. They're blah, 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 blah. Well, I understand that meteors are falling stars. We call them shooting stars. No, they're not. They're not stars. Yeah, they are. They are falling stars because that's what they called them. You know what I mean? Just because we have knowledge that, like, well, some of those lights up there are actually extremely far away, and they really don't fall, though they could supernova. I mean, they can wink out anyways. They apparently fall. They're visibly seen to fall when you have meteor storms and showers. But also there's the idea, you know, this can be read in an entirely different way. Because the stars of heaven falling can be symbolic of angels and heavenly beings coming down from the sky. Like people take in Revelation 12 when it says the dragon, that his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. That is seen as being him drawing angels after him and bringing them down to earth. So, I mean, that's where the idea, you get the idea of fallen angels. Or you could go also to Isaiah 14, where it says, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, which means in Hebrew, bright star, son of the dawn. Or morning star. We translate morning star, but it is two words, bright star, son of the dawn. Morning star. So the stars shall fall from heaven. The moon shall not give her light. Meaning it's going to be darkened. Everything's going to be dark, dark, dark. The sun's going to be blotted out. The moon shall not give her light. The stars shall fall from heaven. The powers of the heavens shall be shaken. I mean, it's the world is going to be, you know, like this is the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. But when we're talking about Jesus' return, it's going to get, like, the intensity is going to go, you know, from 10 to 50, you know. It's going to get crazy. In fact, if you look at the seventh trump each time, or the seventh trump, the seventh seal, or seventh trump, seven bowl, whatever. When you get down to the end of all those signs and stuff, and the plagues, there's a final, there was lightnings and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail, and it all comes in at once. When Satan appears, there will be disasters that bring about things. You look at the trumpets. It's like, you know, the sun is darkened by a third, and the moon is darkened by a third, and the daylight doesn't show for a third. Everything is diminished by 1/3 throughout the trumpets. And there are things coming out of the sky, and there may be earthquakes in diverse places, and wars and rumors of wars continuing. But when Jesus comes, all that stuff ends. And just before he comes, it does crescendo. It means it ramps up like a music. You know, it gets really loud right before the end. So there's a crescendo. But that is not, you know, when I was talking about the signs of the end times, people always say, like, well, there's a crescendo leading up to the end times. Not really. The end times just kind of start, and then it crescendos with the return of Jesus. There's no preamble to the end times that we should. Ooh, there were 1% more earthquakes this decade than last decade. Well, that's significant. Even when they say, well, I've heard them say, like, there's been a bump. It's like, we've only been keeping records for 100 years or so. When you're talking about rates of earth, I want to see a big, I don't want to see just a little, I want to see something that's big. I mean, to even consider it. Because in a normal statistical variation, you're going to have bumps and stuff. I mean, what do you expect the rate of earthquakes to be constant? There's one a year. You know, it doesn't, tectonic activity it fluctuates from year to year and from decade to decade, from century to century. So you can't, it's not a reliable sort of sign. Meteor impacts, however, in human history, I mean, they're bound to be one, right? We know we're bound to get hit by something. It's just it's been so long that, well, and I think that is the first sign, is a meteor impact that has the effect that darkens the sky for a third, etc., etc. And that will herald the coming of Antichrist. It won't be a world killer. But when Jesus returns, we're gonna see just how. It says, the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. The foundations of the earth are going to be shaken. I mean, the world is going to quake. There's going to be an earthquake such as was not, like it says, when Jesus returns, there will be an earthquake such as was not from the beginning of the creation which God created even to this time. It's going to be insane. And so, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And that's the moment when he comes in his glory, with his power. It's going to be, because the world, according to Revelation, is going to go after this false Christ, this Antichrist, the beast, empowered by the dragon. They will worship the dragon and the beast. The false prophet will lead them and do miracles, and etc., etc. And and the whole world is going to go after this false god. And then when Jesus shows up, and when the two witnesses rise and ascend up in a cloud into heaven, great fear is going to fall on everyone, because it's like that's not supposed to happen. It's when Satan starts heading for the back door. Get out. Too late. And you can say, well, why does he cooperate with all this? Why does he do that? What? I ever think, like, I've had people like, why would Satan do that? Why wouldn't he just, And there's a lot of different ways you could look at it. But I look at it this way. This is what he was created to do. It's what he wants to do. He can't help doing it. He wants to do this. He hates you. And he has no, it's like, why did the guys at Columbine shoot up that school? Why would they do that? Because they hated existence. They hated everything. They hated humanity. They didn't think we deserved to live. And so they wanted to display all their contempt for everything that God has made. And you don't have to, and you could say, well, if I knew God was real, for sure, I would behave differently. Oh, maybe you would. But what if, like, I talk about predestination and stuff. What if you know God's real, and also your destiny is not for salvation? You also kind of know your destiny. You know what I mean? Do you decide, well, no, I'm going to be more virtuous than God. I'm just going to sit out and not perform according to everything I lust after. You know? No, he's very glad to do what he does. Not I'm glad bitterly. He's fully willing. It's because it's like you offer a dog a steak. You know, it gets distracted. It goes after what it wants, and I think that's the devil. There's no high. Who's he going to prove anything to? Who's he going to show anything to? He's going to show up God. You know, like it says, there will be a bridle in the jaw of the nations, causing them to err. And the tribes are going to mourn after what's going on, because their eyes are going to be opened to what's happening, and they're like, we messed up. And they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. As the lightning shines from the east even to the west. So that's why we meet him in the clouds, because he's coming in the clouds. He's coming in the sky. And also you could say, well, Paul, in 1 Thessalonians he says, meet the Lord in the air. Clouds could be referencing great clouds of people. Meaning if you have enough people up in the sky with Jesus, it has the same cumulative effect as water vapor. It forms a cloud visibly. You ever see a great flock of birds? Or maybe in a sense, the fowls of heaven, I don't know. I'd hate to say like that the saints gathered with Christ looks like a massive flock of birds in the sky. And that's interesting. And, I'm just going to explore this because it's kind of interesting. When the World Trade Center was destroyed, when the plane struck it and people were jumping out of the building, children, and I'm not sure if adults, but they thought they were seeing birds when the people were jumping out of the building because they were far enough away. They just saw these black shapes, falling from the sky. And the children assumed that they were birds because of they didn't want to, the mind of a child, instantly sort of makes something that makes sense. And like, what is in the sky? Birds, and maybe the smoke is killing them and they're falling from the sky. They don't think like, oh, the people trapped in that building are leaping to their deaths. That's a bit dark for a child. But that's I remember seeing a documentary where they talked about the things kids were drawing because they were watching these things. They're seeing these things. So I say, oh, they shouldn't be allowed to see these things. It's like, I don't know. Life is you shouldn't protect your children too much. It makes them weak. Reality is scarring, no doubt, but the scars, the wounds heal and they form the scars, It's interesting. They say that, very creative people, there's predictive things, and it's like having a parent die when you're young is one thing that helps predict it, because I've always said that the creativity requires or it seems to me it requires a certain level of melancholy to be truly creative. Or what was it, genius or creativity? I forget. It's not totally required, but a lot of the greatest creative minds were also had undergone some very painful early experiences. It opens your mind to new things, to the dark side of existence, to the shadow world of death. I remember when I was very young, because I lost a loved one very young, I remember thinking about death before I was 4, which is weird. And I know that now. It's like, I don't know if my 4-year-old has ever even thought of any such thing. He never really lost anybody. Certainly nobody close to him. A close parent, or for me, it was a grandparent that lived with us, you know. And it was a significant part of my early life because my dad's working, my mom was busy, and grandparents watched me a lot. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And we read that. And he shall send his angels with great sound of a trumpet. And they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Four winds, the four, you know, everything is divided in the world into fours because we have four basic direct. Even though we have a circle, we have this idea of this perpendicular lines. We go latitude, longitude. Even from ancient times, there's north, south, east, west. You start by dividing everything into cardinal directions. I mean, we could have done it on the basis of 5. It's kind of somewhat arbitrary. You know, I mean, I'm saying there's not like 4 obvious corners of the earth. But the human mind assigns these things. People sometimes, it's funny because it's like they always think in terms of literal truth and in terms of truth that is meaningful. Because even the idea of direction, well, there is no direction without some mind to perceive a path. So he gathers his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. And because I think that's interesting because we will meet him in the air. You know, it's like, so if you're on the wrong, he's returning to Judea, and so you're going to have to be pulled from every direction in the world, from the four winds, from the different, you know, if I'm not going to walk all the way there, I presume. I mean, so it's like they will fly to where he is. He will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from one end of heaven to the other. This is the heaven in terms of the sky. A lot of times the idea of heaven is sort of like muddled because we don't really understand it. I mean, heaven is the canopy of the sky above us, right? Men didn't always understand what it was, but they talked about it in the terms that they understood and what it appeared to be. And so everything written is written in those terms. It'd be weird if it had been written in a way that men couldn't understand in the time of Jesus, like deeply could not understand. You know, talking about the come out of the dimension of the other heavens and then into the apparent heavens of the sky, because a lot of times it means just not earth. There's earth and then there's heaven. We have earth here, and everything that is in earth and under our feet is heaven up there. And we know now that there's a lot up there. There's a lot up there. But what about beyond? You know, beyond all the regions of space. What is everything expanding into anyways? A void? Because, you know, I remember looking at this, you know, like what we call space, the stuff we're all operating in, is something. It's not a void. It has structure. So, you know, it's just, I don't know. Let's go on to the next verse. 32. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Let's take a second real quick. I saw the time. Subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies. For more studies, songs, and more, visit oraclesofgod.org. And then there's my other YouTube channel. It's all linked in the description below. Let's check the questions. No question currently. That's fine. Okay. If you have a question, though, and you don't want to put it into the chat or into the comments, you can send me an email at this address, questions@oraclesofgod.org. And I can privately answer it, or on the thing, on the Bible study. I will not expose your personal information. And I mean that intentionally, and I will certainly do my best to prevent it from happening unintentionally. So I got nothing in my inbox from anybody. That's okay. So the parable of the fig tree. Learn a parable of the fig tree. And what is it? Well, when it's tender, when the branch is tender and putting out leaves, you know that summer is near, right? When you see leaves coming out, you know winter's over. And I don't know when the figs blossom, when the figs begin to put out leaves exactly myself. Though I may come to know this because a family member introduced me to someone who does figs, who, yes, even this far north. An old Italian gentleman who does it. He has like a way of protecting them so they don't die over the winter. And so that would, you know, it would be cool to get figs and understand more about how they work. So figs, they put out their leaves, and you know, oh, summer's coming. It's almost summer because the fig trees have put out their leaves. Well, what's that mean? So likewise, when you see all these things, know that it is near. So what he is saying is, when you see the things I'm talking about, when you see them start to happen, you know, my coming is near. They ask, when is this going to happen? What's the sign of your coming? When's the end of the world? Well, here you go. When you see these things begin to happen, when you see all of them, know that it is near and at the doors. Now, some people interpret this wrong, and I think it is wrong. And they say, well, the fig tree blossoming refers to Israel becoming a nation in 1948. How does that make any sense? It's a big leap. So, well, the fig tree represents Israel. Yeah, I know in the prophets, I did a study on this called the parable of the fig tree. And I tried to draw in all the references to figs to see if there's some sort of overarching parable of the fig tree that goes through the whole Bible that ties Israel into this verse. And I didn't find it. Sometimes there's some verses in the Old Testament prophets where it talks about, you know, they will live in peace, every man under his vine and under his fig tree. But I mean, the idea that refers to Israel becoming a nation, though. Because they can have peace, every man under his vine and every man under his fig tree. But they don't have to be in the land. I don't think there's any connection. Now, there are prophecies that Israel would return and be builded as a nation again. But they're not given a specific time, signs of the end. Though, I'll tell you what, it does give you some thought because, you know, it seems like it's right. Like, for the end times to come to pass, it seems that the Jews ought to be in Judea. Right? It would be weird if they were still just scattered all over the world. The fact that they all were gathered together again after nearly 2,000 years, well, 1,900 years? Is that long enough? They were scattered for almost 1,900 years. Precisely. Well, it depends on when you measure it. It's interesting because it was in 70 AD that Jerusalem was destroyed. And in 1967, in the 6 Days War, the Jews retook Jerusalem. So it was almost exactly, it was just 3 years before, it was like 1,897 years. 1897. Yeah, not a very, I was trying to figure out what the factors were of 1897. I don't know. It's definitely not divisible by 3, and it's not divisible by 9. So I don't want to get caught up in that. I'll start doing math in my head, and I got enough math later on today, so let's not do that. Besides, I don't like to get caught up in the significance of numbers, but also when you have a date like that, that's pretty close to accurate, because I believe 70 A.D. Titus, we can count from 70 A.D. It's after the dating problems. Because I always get confused, because it's like, when was Jesus born? Oh, 4 BC, 3 BC, 2 BC. You see all three numbers thrown out there. But he wasn't born in 1 AD. Or there is no year 0. It goes from 1 AD to -1. There's no 0. As far as, is there a 0? I don't know. I thought there wasn't. It just goes to year 1. So, the parable of fig tree refers to just simply a simple horticultural thing. When you see leaves coming out of the trees, you know that summer's coming. Well, when you see these signs happening, know that I'm coming. Oh, here comes this verse. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Now, here's the thing. There's no doubt in my mind that that's something Jesus said. And it's a testimony, really, to the faith of the apostles and of those who wrote the gospel. If it was, remember, calling the book of Matthew is nearly arbitrary. There's no internal particular reason, except Matthew does play larger in this gospel than in the others, you could say. It's a traditional attribution, so and it may be accurate, I don't know. He may be the ultimate source. But it's generally believed that the Gospel of Matthew, came together like at 80 or 90 AD, right? And for them to continue to write this, this generation shall not pass. It takes faith, because one, the first thing you think when you hear that is like, well, then it should all be over like 2,000 years ago. Almost, It should have ended. Okay, Matthew comes out 85, 90, whatever. Then by the year 100 or 10, 20, the generation's passing. Because Jesus said that back in 30 AD. He said that in 30, and now we're at 50 years down the road. There's not much of the generation left. If that's an accurate reading of when it was written. So, but the traditions, there are things in the Bible that go back, way back, that scholars, even skeptical scholars, agree are very early, like pre-writing down the gospel Christian things, because they take on the form of the way an oral tradition would, like, this is the thing, that gospel I preach, that Jesus was born of a virgin, crucified, it's like, gives us like a little grocery list of things we believe. And that's the sort of thing that's written in Paul, which is all very early, and that sort of thing was probably running around verbally from the beginning. And something like this, it has to date to Jesus, because he would be the only one so bold to say so. Now, you could, instead of saying, well, this generation, he meant the generation that sees those things come to pass. And that's a fair way to say it. Then when they see the fig tree, when you see those things come to pass, when you see all these things, know that it is near. Verily I say to you that this generation shall not pass. So all these things be. Meaning that when those things appear, he's coming. It's at the doors. And I'm telling you truly, that generation is not going to pass away. Or this generation, in the context of that, will not pass till all these things be fulfilled. I can deal with that. It seems a little awkward, I guess. It seems a little, the interpretation does not feel... I like for things to feel like that it was like, that's the way it was meant, and it just feels right. And so I don't know. I don't know if that's right, but what I do know is that whatever you want to consider, if it was a delay, or if it was always in, I mean, I always think everything is intentional because I believe in determinism. I mean, God preordains everything to happen the way it does. Whether it was something that in the incarnation that Jesus was, there's some hints that he does not know the day or the hour of his return. In his incarnation, there is like a blind spot. So it could be reflective of that. Though that seems that he would say, truly, truly I say to you, or truly I say to you, this generation shall not pass away. He's lending a lot of credence to that. It's something he wants them to believe. So what he means by that is exceedingly important. And so when you look at verse 35, he says, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words. There's an interesting interplay between the immediacy of verse 34 and the timelessness of verse 35. In one verse he's saying like, oh, the generation's not going to pass away. The next verse he says, well, heaven and earth will pass away. So this generation shall not pass. But heaven and earth shall pass, but my words will not pass. The generation shall not pass, and his words. So both the generation and his words shall not pass. Now by generation he may not mean it doesn't say, like, that's another thing. Let's go back to the idea of generations. It means like when he called them, you generation of vipers, this offspring. Maybe he's referring back to his elect as an offspring. It's a little, again, doesn't feel right. But here's the thing. Sometimes the way we feel things is a big problem. Huge problem in interpreting the Bible. And you get this because, like, if I want to say to someone, well, you know what? Actually, God doesn't love everybody. He loves the world. He doesn't love every individual. He loves the world. And this is how much he loved the world. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe on him would have everlasting life. Would not perish, but have everlasting life. Okay, quote it right, Paul. See, he loves the world, but he doesn't love I love my home, but I don't love the upstairs toilet because it doesn't work right. You know what I mean? So I can love a whole without talking about particular parts. So also, the generation can it be limited to a time? Yeah, it could be like limited to a time. But I mean, I did not even, when I looked that word up, we go, talking about my generation. I always hate that song. My generation. Oh, all that stuff. I'm going to Bible Hub, and I just want to see what it says about that word generation. If it's the same word, or if it's like the people who live in a particular time. Genia, race, family, generation. This Genia, we get our word Genesis. So, my preconception that generation means talking about my generation, meaning a group of people generated in a particular time frame. Like that thought that's what that word means, may be getting in the way of me understanding Jesus. What if we translated family? This family shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. This race shall not pass. Why do we assume it means a time-limited group of people? That's because that's how we talk about it. We got Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, Generation Millennials. We got the baby boomers, the silent generation, the greatest generation. And then they're all time limited. That's what unifies them. That's it. But Genea primarily refers to family or race. A group of people related by birth, not by time. So maybe like I said, it's like I have like this prejudice. This is what I talk about. And this is what I'm working out right here live on the live stream, because it's like, meditating on things for years, I see the ways in which the way people become stuck in a particular mode of thought that prevents them from seeing anything. They become blinded by their own preconceived ideas. That's why, it's like, if I could, I guess I'd wait till I'd spent my whole life and then at the end give the verdict. You know what I mean? So I'd say it's like you can't take men and enshrine them like they do with Luther, Calvin. It's like these guys, all right? And then it's like, you didn't consider, like, keep thinking about it? You didn't reconsider anything you said? And you figured everything out. The bottomless Word of God. You know what I mean? The inspired Bible, which is not a big book. It's a decent book, but it's not like, well, it's big. It's a collection of 66 different books of various utility. They're not all as useful as the others, I think it's weird to regard the Bible as one sacred whole, because, like, I read Esther. It's not particularly, not a lot of particular utility in that book. And in other books, there's like they're greater and lesser utility. I mean, there's lots of lessons to be gained from Kings, but pound for pound, can you compare Kings to Isaiah or a gospel? I mean, pound for word, how much just juice is there to just sink your teeth into? So you meditate on these things and you start thinking about, you try to look at your own prejudices. Like when you get stuck in a weird interpretation, that's a good time to start looking at yourself like, what's with me? Why am I stuck in an interpretation? Why is it I can't hear this verse any way other than, this time that I'm living in, Jesus, will not end until everything is, meaning that all the things I've said are going to happen in just a few years. Or they should have happened already. And then they wrote this like decades later. They're still writing that down. And I just think, like, well, and I'm somewhat cynical. Do you think they would have written that? The Gospel of John says, if everything Jesus said and did were written down, I suppose that the world cannot contain the books that should be written. Right? If I'm getting said, okay, we're going to write the gospel. I'm living my life. Let's say it is Matthew, and I'm like 90. I'm sitting down, or I can't. Well, he might be literate because he was a tax collector, but that's not necessarily true. You just got to be able to count. And so he's, let's say he's got a scribe. All right, we're going to dictate the gospel. This time that we're living will not pass away. The generation that I'm a part of, Matthew, even though I'm 90, it will not end until everything that's in this book is happened. And this guy would be like, maybe we, You know, I heard it said that if everything that Jesus said and did were written down, the world could not contain the book. So maybe we shouldn't write down that particular thing, he said. If that's what he meant, why would they put it in the gospel decades after Jesus has risen from the dead and not returned? We're still sure he's coming in this generation, even though we're all like 100. And most of us have died, really. By then, most of the apostles were dead. And the Gospels come together. But I mean, the information, let that not shake your mind. I mean, it's like, so? Why? What? They were so busy doing things, it's like the things get collected later. I mean, it's within their lifetimes, but as they start passing away, they're like, we better get these guys to tell us what's what before they go. The Gospels aren't like the letters of Paul, which are part of the ministry. The Gospels are these very tightly constructed religious, it's like just the collection of everything they knew about Jesus, everything they knew he said, into these narrative stories that sort of tell people what happened. So I contest that idea. This family shall not pass. I think it's because we're talking about time. When you see these things happen, da-da-da. And then it just feeds right into our English thought of that meaning of the word, our modern English thought, that generation. It's like if I say seduction. He was seduced. I remember in Star Wars, he was seduced by the dark side. Okay? So we still understand that seduced does not mean he was sexually seduced. But it does carry a strong connotation. If someone said, well, she seduced me to buy the car. You start thinking like, seduced? What do you mean? Well, she offered me a, 20% below sticker. I couldn't resist. So that sort of is a different way of looking at it, right? So it's anything with generation. We're just so used to seeing it in terms of time. And then the fact that it's given in this sort of time question. What maybe Jesus is saying is the family of the Jews, the race of the Jews, would not pass away. Which after the destruction of 70 AD would be something to say, a prediction to make. They would not be destroyed as a people. The family would not pass away till all these things be fulfilled. Maybe that's it. Or maybe he means the family of God, his elect. So, there's two ways for you to look at it. All right, well, and heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. Yep, and we're going to get to the verses we kind of covered at the beginning of this chapter. Maybe I've got like 2 minutes. I hate going over. I would gladly go on for 2 hours straight. But I just think if someone has to go and they really want to keep up with it, I hate to. But you can come back and listen later. It doesn't have to be watched live. God knows. Sometimes I wish it wasn't live, but then I would be tempted to edit, and we can't have that. That slows things down. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. And again, that is a bit of a hyperbole as far as it's not predicting the end of heaven and earth, but rather it is emphasizing the durability of what he has to say. But of that day and of that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. That's something I covered already. It speaks of his sort of not knowing the day or the hour. He had some, there was a intentional ignorance on his part, information that in his incarnation, as he divested himself of divine attributes or laid them aside, so to speak, So that he did not appear glorious in his human incarnation, he appeared normal. So also there's some aspect of God's omniscience which was not given him in the flesh. I mean, perhaps just entering into a body puts you into a limited state, because you are entering into a human body, because you're depending on these organs of thought and all that. And so, and being found in fashion as a man, he lived as a man. And so, and it's funny, we began this study talking about these verses, but in Luke, because I wanted to get that, I wanted to get the part about the eagles. And it's worth emphasizing again. So that's what we're going to do next time. We're going to emphasize what it means when one is taken and the other one's left. He's going to talk about the flood. He's going to talk about Lot. Well, he doesn't talk about Lot this time, of course. He talks about the flood. He talks about the bed and the grinding at the mill. Watch, for you know not what hour your Lord does come. Yeah, I'm going to leave that because this is all very important. We'll start with verse 36 next time. Just want to write it down because I don't get to always, I don't know why I'm making you endure that. Hey, thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to staying with you again tomorrow. And maybe we can get through this chapter. We'll see. And, okay. Let's just go out with, something cheerful.